It's the World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Noor Ibrahim is Daily Beast World Deputy Editor and joins us from New York City. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. David Gormazano cracks the whip at France24.com. How are you, sir?
Fine, how are you?
I don't know if you've ever met her. Leila Jacinto, also of France 24 fame.
Not cracking the whip this time.
Has donned us with her presence. How are you?
Very good.
All right. And from Brussels, Dave Clark, who's coming off a virtual EU summit, sign of the times, news editor at the French news agency AFP. How are you, Dave?
Oh, I'm good. Sat here at home as usual.
At home, okay. The sedentary Dave Clark with us, and the World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. As weeks go, Saudi Arabia's 35-year-old crown prince has had better. Mohammed bin Salman leaving hospital after an appendicitis operation. Piling on the pain, well, the new president of the United States. Joe Biden's first phone call to Riyadh going not to MBS, but to his dad, the ailing King Salman. And this ahead of the declassification of intelligence that links the crown prince to the 2018 murder of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul.
I expect that we will be in a position before long to speak to steps to promote accountability going forward for this horrific crime.
Noor, can you translate the diplomatic ease there? Steps to promote accountability. Does that mean there are going to be sanctions against MBS?
You know, I think that it's really sending a very strong message here. This is happening after years of overlooking gross human rights abuses by the kingdom. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember that this is actually exactly what's supposed to happen. There is a legal requirement for this report to be declassified. So I don't think we should view this as an unprecedented revolutionary move by the Biden administration. This is actually just exactly what should happen.
And as we speak, we're getting breaking news. The report is being declassified, and the report says that the Crown Prince squarely approved the Khashoggi assassination. What next, Leila Jacinto?
Well, to be honest, will he be on? Look, that's not for me to say, but I would think not. I think what's been happening from the Biden administration, first and foremost, is just resetting the Trump administration relationship with Saudi Arabia. And they have definitely, the Biden administration have definitely sent out a signal of sidelining the Crown Prince. So that is in motion. The rhetoric is pretty strong. But we are still talking about the Crown Prince, who is still the heir to the Saudi throne. And Saudi Arabia is less important right now for the U.S. because less dependence on oil, but it is still very major player.
You wrote a piece for France24.com in which you speculate aloud over whether or not there are those in Washington pushing to perhaps sideline MBS. After all, in the past, just because you're the crown prince doesn't mean you get to be the king.
This is true. But I mean, Washington can do what Washington can do. Ultimately, it's an internal House of Saud matter. There is no doubt that there are elements of the family who have been sidelined. Some of them have been brutally treated in MBS's crackdown against corruption. So there is definitely dissatisfaction in the royal family, but that is an extremely opaque institution, and we can speculate forever about internally what happens to MBS. But on the international stage, he has definitely faced the heat. And he's already, since Biden was elected in November, he's already started to make some sort of concessions, very small concessions, but the release of the female activists, for instance. So he's internationally feeling the heat. But internally, the House of Saud still carries on with its own rules, really.
Again, the Crown Prince, according to that U.S. intelligence report that's just been released David Gormazano saying that MBS approved and likely ordered the assassination of Khashoggi. Is this normal for what Biden, the candidate, promised, that he's going through with it? Or are you surprised that he's actually sticking to his word when it comes to Saudi Arabia?
It's pretty early to tell where the Biden administration is going to stand on this issue. But definitely, I think I feel we're going back to Obama times, that Saudi Arabia will remain close to the US, but certainly will be more under scrutiny than it was during the Trump years. But frankly, I don't know, maybe you feel differently, but the Biden administration is only starting to tackle this issue, and Saudi Arabia remains their ally in the region.
And let's not forget, we've known this for 2 years. So the Biden administration has had plenty of time to actually prepare for this. That's why he made a phone call to the Saudi king to make clear what was in the report. So it's not a surprise, really.
No, nothing in there is a surprise, perhaps. But are you surprised in any way, Dave Clark, about the declassifying of this report?
No, as was said, the report would have to have been declassified at some point. That was a procedure that had to happen, and obviously the Biden administration is signaling that they're not going to let Saudi Arabia get away with just anything. But a lot of the Biden administration people, including obviously the vice president himself, were already in the Obama administration, and at that point, the Saudi Arabian government was bombarding Yemen quite severely. There were other concerns about Saudi government policies, and yet at the time, the very same national security officials who are this week releasing this report on MBS's role in the Khashoggi murder were defending Saudi Arabia. So many U.S. allies killed people, and the United States themselves occasionally has people killed through their drone strikes and through their military operations around the world. I think this will blow over.
You think it'll blow over. In 2019, though, you had Donald Trump bragging to journalist Bob Woodward that he saved the Crown Prince from bipartisan ire from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. I, quote, saved his ass, Trump said. I was able to get Congress to leave him alone. I was able to get them to stop. Do you believe that he did it? Woodward asked. No, he says that he didn't do it. I mean, the big difference between when Biden, the vice president, was in the White House and Biden, the president, is in the White House is you've had Donald Trump and you've had the Khashoggi murder. Noor Ibrahim, picking up on Dave Clark's point that the Obama administration did back Saudi Arabia when that campaign in Yemen started.
Right, and this is part of a larger pattern that we're seeing recently from the Biden administration. They're freezing arms sales to Saudi Arabia and withdrawing support for the war in Yemen. So it's definitely part of a larger pattern that is signaling a shift and, a move towards realigning that relationship with the kingdom.
Would you say Biden's going further than Obama did?
I would say that it's a continuation at this point.
All right, a continuation. And overnight, we saw the first use of military force on Joe Biden's watch, an airstrike targeting facilities used by Iran-backed militias in Syria just over the border with Iraqi Kurdistan. According to one side, one person killed. According to another, somewhere between 17 and 22. It had followed several missile attacks inside Iraq in the past weeks, including the one that killed a Filipino contractor inside the U.S. base at Erbil International Airport, the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan. And there, it's a measured response. He could have done nothing. He could have hit a lot harder. He didn't hit inside of Iraq, Joe Biden. There seems to be this grand game going on with the Saudis on the one side, the Iranians on the other.
Yes, And this strike targeted an Iranian-backed militia. So on the one hand, there is the Biden administration signaling that they would like to get back to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. But then on the other hand, it's also sending a signal to Tehran to control some of its militia activities happening in the region. I think what we have by now forgotten in 2021 is just what a debilitating role these militias have on the ground and for citizens, for ordinary citizens. And at some point with this whole Iraq and Syria conflict, there needs to be some sort, there needs to be a political discussion on the end to the Syrian conflict. And that, I'm afraid, would involve talking to, getting Russia into the picture. Because this is the
and
militias...
Bashar al-Assad, maybe?
Exactly. I mean, because militias were the problem that brought ISIS into the picture. The Sunni dissatisfaction gave rise to a Sunni militia that became the golden era for Shiite militias. And, these militias are making life hell for citizens on the ground.
All right, so before we can have that discussion, there's the discussion about returning to the discussion, the one over the 2015 nuclear deal. Earlier this week, UN inspectors agreed to Tehran's demand to end surprise inspections of Iranian nuclear sites. They expressed alarm at Tehran's drifting away from the terms of the 2015 nuclear deal. But a return to talks is possible. Now it's a question of who blinks first.
Now, we have reduced the level of our commitment, but we have always said it's reversible. The minute they come back to full compliance, we will go back to full compliance.
President Biden has said, if Iran comes back into strict compliance with the JCPOA, the United States is prepared to do the same.
This game of who blinks first, Dave Clark, they better go fast since Iran's having elections in June. It's got to happen quickly, right?
Yes, I suppose so. Obviously, Iran hasn't signaled that we're prepared to make any concessions. Quite the reverse. Obviously, it was the United States under President Trump that pulled out of the deal. And Biden administration has signaled that they're ready to go back into it. But there's been no sign that Iran is prepared to is prepared to limit its own activities as a kind of sweetener to try and lure people back.
But isn't that posturing
the
before going back to the bargaining table?
Hopefully. But obviously the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and in Syria are still continuing their activities. The Houthis in Yemen are still continuing to do their thing. So the Iranians obviously see this as a return to the JCPOA as it was before Trump, strictly a nuclear-related deal, and it's. And they're not prepared to rein in any of the other activities that the Western powers find objectionable.
All right, Donald Trump may be gone, but one of his biggest admirers is still in charge in Brazil. And while Trump was known for firing underlings over Twitter, Jair Bolsonaro taking to Facebook to announce he was replacing the boss of state oil company Petrobras with a 71-year-old reserve army general whose current job is running a hydroelectric dam at the Paraguayan border. Now, as for the outgoing boss, Roberto Castelo Branco, fired and fuel subsidies reimposed at the behest of the truckers' union. Free market reforms are fine and dandy, but not when there's a pandemic on and when you're running for re-election in 20 months.
Eu tenho que governar, trocar as peças que, porventura, não estejam dando certo. E se a imprensa está preocupada com a troca de ontem, na semana que vem teremos mais. O que não falta para mim é coragem para decidir, pensando no bem maior da nossa nação.
So let me turn to our former South America correspondent, David Gormazano. This caught the markets by surprise. They were spooked by it. Are you surprised by this idea? All right, the end of fuel subsidies, it's too soon. Let's go back to it now.
I'm never surprised by Jair Bolsonaro. We're back again in the studio talking about how worrying
it's like with
this
Trump,
man is.
You're shocked but not surprised?
Exactly. I don't know if I'm shocked. I mean, we had this Petrobras affair this week, but the week before there was also some pro-gun decrees that Bolsonaro did take. Those decrees are very weird because they seem to be designed to make the law on gun control that dates from 10, 15 years ago inefficient. And then you wonder, why is he doing this? More guns in a country like Brazil, where you have 40,000 homicides per year. The two main groups that are victims of homicides in Brazil are young black men and policemen, police officers. What is he doing? So, and with Bolsonaro, the answer is always the same. He's courting the popular vote.
And it's like in the United States, where he doesn't have to win over the whole of the population. He just has to fire up his base.
So we're talking about an election in 2022. If the election was to take place tomorrow, with his 30% approval, he would be in the second run, because there's two legs in the presidential elections in Brazil. And being in the second leg, depending on who's in front, he would have a good chance to win the election. So that's it. He's on track, and he's been on track since day one. Re-election is his goal, and he's been defiant towards he's been asked to hand in his mobile phone a few months ago, and he said, "No, I won't. And if you want to take my phone from me, I will put the Supreme Court judges in jail because I have the military with me."
Mm. And with the appointment of
it's a never-ending
of a reserve army general, there's the talk about how there are more and more people coming from the military, like himself, a former army captain, in the high halls of power. Noor Ibrahim, you know, we saw Donald Trump lose in the United States, and it's not a given that around the world those that are like-minded will go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in Brazil's case, you know, this is a country who endured decades of a military dictatorship. So that's something that's still very, very fresh to certain people. So, you know, seeing more of these military figures in all these executive government positions spooks people a lot.
Final point on this, David. For his last shareholders meeting over Zoom, the outgoing boss of Petrobras traded in his usual suit and tie for a T-shirt, and he's got
the Gap.
Mind the Gap, like they have in the London Underground. What's that about? Because that's been causing a frenzy over Twitter.
I suppose the gap between the real price of fuel and the price that people in Brazil will now be paying. But it's also a reminder, if anyone still needs reminding of this, apparently they still do, that often the mainstream economic right, conservative right, has been tempted to ally itself with supposedly right-wing populists. In the hope of getting improved economic management, as they see it, market management, after governance that was often inefficient by people like Dilma Rousseff, the previous president in Brazil. So, but what happens is populists are populist, and no matter how many orthodox economists you put in your government after coming to power on a populist wave, you're going to be tempted to pull these kind of moves for the truckers' union, for example. And in this case, they've severely damaged the economic stability of the oil company, which is one of the mainstays of their economy. And presumably there'll be some regret among the more mainstream right, who thought they were coming to power behind a kind of facade of populism.
All right, yeah,
it was real.
It was real. When we come back, we're gonna take a look at how real the global rollout is for COVID vaccines. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us from New York, but not from headquarters, right? You're still not going back to the office, Noor Ibrahim.
Yep. Nope. Still home.
Yep. Nope. Okay. No office for Noor Ibrahim, the deputy Beast, the Daily Beast deputy world editor. Staying in the office is David Gormazano at France24.com.
Good evening, Francois.
Same for Lila Jacinto. Nice to see real human beings.
Oh, sitting on the same table as you, Francois.
All right. And Dave Clark of the French news agency AFP, who is with us from Brussels. We don't need to tell you there's a pandemic on, what with new variants forcing fresh lockdowns in places like Belgium. But sometimes the longest journey begins with a single step. After Ghana on Wednesday, Ivory Coast, now the second developing world nation to receive shipment of its first doses of vaccine under the United Nations COVAX inoculation scheme. Lila Jacinto, this, it's again, we've had... On the one hand, there's the wonder of the fact that we've been able to get a vaccine so quickly after identifying this out-of-the-blue coronavirus. And on the other hand, there's criticisms over the slow rollout. This UN initiative, the COVAX vaccine, and by the way, those latest doses, they're coming from AstraZeneca via India. It shows, again, that it's slow, perhaps, but you do have to have the whole world pulled together on this.
Yes, unfortunately, people and leaders keep repeating this, but it's not translated into action on the ground. And this pandemic, like last year, is exacerbating all the problems that are currently in the global world order, and that includes vaccine nationalism, because you've once again got the most affluent countries, including the EU, that have way too many stocks, that have overordered their vaccine stocks, even though the rollout has been slower in the EU. But then you have the vast swathes of the developing world that have not had access to the vaccine, and so yes, the AstraZeneca was produced in India, but then once again, we're seeing the same old issues of patents and rights. This week, was it, or last week, India and South Africa asked the WTO to lift the patent restrictions temporarily, and the US and the EU were against it. So yes, manufacturing can happen in the developing world, but the patents are still caught up.
Dave Clark, that's something that perhaps gets underreported here in Europe. This complaint that was filed with the World Trade Organization that to scrap the patents on this so that more of these vaccines can be produced regionally.
Yes, I mean that would seem like the least we could do in a global pandemic like this, and I obviously personally agree with what Lila just said. But if to play big pharma advocate for a moment, the CEOs did come to Brussels this week and were grilled by MEPs, and one of them, Pascal Soriot from AstraZeneca, did explain that it's not just a question of having the patent. The biopharma production is quite complicated, and just transferring the patent information to a plant wouldn't necessarily make it easy to produce there. And a good example of that is the fact that here in the European Union, AstraZeneca has had the Oxford patent to produce its vaccine, and to do so without breaking any rules. And has access to some very modern pharmaceutical plants in Holland and in Belgium. And their production has been very disappointing in the first quarter. They say they'll catch up, but the European Union, which is obviously a rich, powerful area, has not had the vaccines it needed in the first quarter, hence its slow rollout. So for them, for the pharmaceutical companies, they would say that it wouldn't just be a question of giving South Africa the patent. But in which case, I would say, why not just give it to them? I mean, then they don't complain, and hopefully it'll be able to help them to produce it at some point in the future. But that's the point of view of the pharma companies.
All right, Dave Clark, hitting on a sore subject on this continent. while West Africa gets its first vaccines, while the United States has now marked its 50 millionth inoculation. These good news stories irking many Europeans. The rollout's been painfully slow in places like France, where we've just crossed the, wait for it, 4% vaccinated threshold. And hey, bash Boris Johnson all you want. The UK has now vaccinated more people, David Gormazano, than all of the European Union.
So it's good publicity for Brexit then.
No, but you know, what's your reaction when you see that chart, though?
My reaction is that what happened was pretty incredible. Is we've decided that it would be the European Union that would manage the whole thing about vaccines, how we would buy them, how we would roll out the vaccination for the population. And we can only say that there's a serious lack of experience from the European Union.
Because it's never been tried before.
It was the first time that the European Commission was given a task like this, an operational task to work out a vaccination.
Across 27 countries.
And so far, no, the results are not very good. And on the British side, what they did was to recruit some specialists who work with pharmaceutical companies coming from the private sector. And yeah, they've been much sharper and
much better
equipped to deal with this issue. That's no question.
The vaccine rollout, and I want to bring in on this Noor Ibrahim. You know, it's in the United States, it's going much faster as well. It's no small feat logistically to try and vaccinate a country of 360 million. And are you getting the sense now, what with the numbers in many parts of the U.S., where we're seeing the numbers of new infections starting to decrease, that there is light at the end of the tunnel?
I think so. I think people are starting to get really optimistic and looking forward to, if not a normal summer, a summer that's a little bit better than the last one. And you know, obviously there has been issues with the EU and the vaccine rollout, but I think what we saw recently at the EU summit was also a good step. At least there's that acknowledgement of, okay, maybe we were a little naive at the beginning, and we're just going to start really addressing the problems and pressuring manufacturers to get these things out.
Pressuring manufacturers indeed. At that virtual EU summit, the president of the EU Commission singling out AstraZeneca with, listen for it, what sounds a lot like a threat.
The vast majority of exports is done by BioNTech Pfizer, 95% approximately, and the rest basically by Moderna. Both of them are honoring their contract, so that is fine with us. We are in discussions, as you know, with AstraZeneca, where there's room for improvement what the fulfillment of the contract is concerned. So here we have a very close eye on what's going on.
A close eye. Is that a threat, Dave Clark, what she's saying there?
Yes, but it's probably an empty threat. It's a threat, but if they have to go to court, then they're going to be in court for 3 or 4 years. And so hopefully it won't come to that. AstraZeneca said they will step up production. Previously, they were producing in their plant in the Netherlands and exporting it to the UK, which in the political context was seen poorly by the European Union, to say the least. Now they say that not only will the plants inside the EU be working for the EU contract, but that they'll also import from their plants elsewhere in the world, principally from the United States, to try and they're not going to meet their contract, but they will ramp up the amount they're able to bring in. But in addition to the implied threat to AstraZeneca, the other message, just to return to this question of the the slow rollout. The other message from this week's summit, and von der Leyen was far too polite when talking to EU leaders to make this too explicit. But what they seem to be saying was, look, we had a slow start to buying up these vaccines, but now you have some, and if there's a slow rollout of actual vaccinations, inoculations in Europe, that's down to the member states, because many of them do have supplies of vaccine now they haven't used.
Yeah, in France, it's half the vaccines are sitting idle still at this point.
Well, they would say that they are keeping some back for the second dose, whereas the UK has gone for this one dose first and then come back weeks and weeks later for the second dose, which gives them even more of a boost despite in addition to their earlier start. If that works, then so be it. But it's a slight gamble, and some of the other countries have decided to keep some back to give second doses within a shorter time frame. But even taking that into account, it is true that some of the countries in Europe are slower, obviously much slower than the United Kingdom, but slower than each other. Denmark is doing a great job, apparently. Malta is doing a great job, but Germany is moving slowly. Belgium and the Netherlands are moving slowly, and so is France.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't want the AstraZeneca jab. David Golmazano?
Yes. Is it well? I heard the health minister Olivier Véran yesterday saying he was worried with medical personnel in retirement homes refusing to get the AstraZeneca jab.
Because now the data is in and it is efficient.
Yeah, and it is worrying. There is we knew a few months ago that about 50% of the French were reluctant to get a vaccine. Recently, I haven't seen any polls.
So nothing like a shortage, because apparently now that there's a shortage, people are complaining they don't.
Now I want to get a vaccine.
And the other big issue at that summit, by the way, was these so-called green passports. Europeans are green with envy, by the way, because they've seen Israelis are now returning to the gym, to the restaurant, to the concert halls with a little app you have on your phone. The UK Prime Minister has changed his mind. He's in favor of these vaccine passports so citizens can at least book their summer holidays. Yes, please, say the likes of Greece and Austria.
Ein normales Leben wieder zurück. Wir wollen die Freiheit wieder zurück, innerhalb Europas zu reisen, ganz gleich, ob geschäftlich oder privat. Und wir wollen vor allem auch die Möglichkeit, dass wir wieder in Kulturveranstaltungen, in die Gastronomie, in die Hotellerie einfach hineingehen können und das auch genießen können.
So we'd all like to dream of a great summer vacation and being able to travel, Lila Jacinto. Of course, with these vaccine passports, we don't know, does that mean that those who don't have them won't be able to go away? Does that mean that if you've, it's...
Look, there are a couple of issues. The EU talks about, having a sort of discrimination of people who have these passports and don't. I actually do not understand how these work. We know, for instance, that AstraZeneca is not as effective against the South African strain. So what are these passports going to say? You got X vaccine at X time. No, it's way too early to have this. We are not at the stage with the COVID-19 vaccines as we are with flu vaccines. This will take time to, come to some sort of standard of what the efficacy is.
Dave Clark, was there any closure on that point at the summit?
No, it was a very brief mention in the closing statement, and in fact in the draft statement we saw 2 or 3 days before the summit. But obviously, Sebastian Kurz said afterwards there was big support for the idea, but Macron and Merkel both poured cold water on that. Emmanuel Macron said there was no way he was going to allow discrimination against some sectors of the population, pointing out that old people will get the vaccine first and that young people therefore would miss out on this. And Angela Merkel said it's okay for member states to work on their own vaccine passports, but it'll be months, 3 months, she said, as a minimum, before they could think of a way of linking these things up from country to country within the union so that they could have a common standard for how these things would work. It doesn't seem too complicated. Here's my passport. I've got yellow fever certificate and I've got all my other vaccination certificate. I traveled widely in the world. You'd think you could just put a stamp on there saying that I'm COVID-free, but as Leila said, this is a mutating virus. We don't know to what extent you can be contagious even after you personally have received vaccines. And you don't know whether the future mutations or the South African vaccine, the vaccine passport presumably would have to say you have antibodies against the majority strain in the country to which you're going. I don't know how you measure that. It does seem to be a thing that is supported by countries that want to get tourism up and running very quickly, and less so among countries where they're worried about slow vaccine rollout.
So then we'll have vaccinated people transmitting the disease. This is fantastic.
That's possible, yes, apparently. Well, the science will take a while, but yes.
By the way, COVID is sparking a culture war here in France. Say you're the new green mayor of the traditional capital of French cuisine, the city of Lyon. You have a pandemic, and for sanitary reasons, you can no longer offer a choice of main course for school lunches. Do you serve a meat dish or a non-meat dish? Well, judging by the demonstration outside City Hall Monday in Lyon by farmers, we know what happened. You'll see there they are. Protesting, grilling hamburgers, offering the petting of livestock for people who turned up there. Noor Ibrahim, I think we need the objectivity of somebody who's across the Atlantic for this one. If you were the mayor and you could only offer one choice for the kids for those school lunches, would it be the meat choice or the non-meat choice?
It would be the non-meat choice. It's the quicker option. And, my understanding is that this is a purely logistical safety decision. So I find it interesting how it's spiraled into this, long-winded debate about the environment and ideological differences. It's certainly an interesting thing to watch from afar.
It's triggered a rift even within the government itself. The environment minister, Barbara Pompili, who this week tweeted her praise for a vegetarian school lunch while on a visit to Brittany. She even spells out the menu there in that tweet. Called this controversy prehistoric. That's not, though, how the agriculture minister sees it.
Nutritionnel, c'est aberrant d'arrêter de servir de la viande dans toutes les cantines de la République. D'un point de vue, je vais y venir. D'un point de vue social, c'est une honte, parce que c'est toujours une écologie de l'entre-soi, où à chaque fois, ce sont ceux qui sont les plus fragiles, qui n'ont pas forcément accès à des repas équilibrés, qui sont pénalisés par de telles décisions.
So, David Gormazano, are you with Barbara Pompili or are you with Julien Lenormandie?
I think I'm with the people who are starting to realize where the next presidential campaign is going in this country. I think, the serious political campaign will start in September, and we'll have Islam, Muslims, Islamism. That's going to be...
So a lot of identity politics. Is this part of the identity politics?
I think you were talking about culture wars?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the next presidential election will be a cultural battle around themes like Islam, Islamism, Muslims.
So it's the Macron government taking on the Greens who did well in local elections.
Exactly. The Macron government see the Greens as a potential rival that could obstruct its strategy to get re-elected. And they are taking on the Greens. It's got nothing to do with menus if beef is good or bad, or it's politics.
Leila Jacinto?
I'm getting hungry just listening to this conversation. But it's, as David Gormanzano says, it's going to be a very excruciating next few years until the next presidential election, because Macron's government, which was voted into power as a centrist government, has basically abandoned the left and has made the calculation that he needs to win this election by quoting the right. So identity politics, bring back, everything seems to be an affront to the values of the Republic. This is classic right baiting, and we are not going to have the end of this until 2022, hopefully.
Dave Clark, as a proud Geordie, I know that there's a product you can endorse, and you have Greg's sausage rolls. Even there, the times they are changing. 2 years ago, you had Greg's Gate, outrage over the rolling out of vegan sausage rolls. Have you changed your? How do you feel about the vegan sausage rolls? First of all,
well, can he see it?
Because I've been in Belgium and because there's been a lockdown, I haven't actually tried the Greg's vegan sausage roll yet. On my rare occasions in the UK, obviously I'm going to get my favorite products first. But when it was introduced, there was a similar, although less bitter and politicized, culture war moment in the UK. This was seen as woke to have a meat-free sausage roll to use the current.
I'm told it's selling really well.
Yeah, no, it turns out to be really popular. I think it helps that it's almost as unhealthy as the meat. That it's a greasy package. So I don't think people mind it so much. Here in Brussels, we've seen recently that the European Union had an internal row about efforts by the beef lobby to get the European Union to ban the use of the term veggie burger. They said that that burger should be kept for meat products. That was overturned very late in the legislative process. That almost became a new one of these crazy European straight banana directives. But the meat lobby was defeated on that point at the end, and I found it very odd because obviously the citizens of Veggie Burger have been making veggie burgers for centuries, and I think their product should be respected.
All right, it is to be expected, and of course...
That's a joke about Hamburg, obviously, but...
Well, food for
There's
thought.
No ham in a hamburger.
It's food for thought in any case. Dave Clark, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Brussels. I want to thank Noor Ibrahim for being with us from New York City. Lila Jacinto, David Gormizano, thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.